welcome to today's training on REACH tips. We have our REACH tips series this year, and today's topic is going to be focusing on community changes. If you were with us last month, you know that we covered community actions. And typically, for those of you who know me or who have gone through REACH training with me, know that I usually actually like to talk about community changes first. However, we did kind of the reverse approach. We talked about community actions last month, and this month our focus is on community changes. So if you were at last month's webinar, you might see a couple things that are very similar to what we kind of talked about last month. That's just because of the nature of community actions and changes and the relationship between the two. So if there's anything today that we kind of recovered, feel free to hop off if you're done. Or if you have questions on it because you maybe forgot to ask last time or something, feel free to ask that as well. So our agenda for today looks like this. We're going to talk about what is a community change, right? So kind of breaking it back down to the basics. And then we're going to get into description must-haves and really kind of talk about some examples, what makes it a good description, other things that you might want to add depending on what you're entering. We're then going to get into some tips/help. A lot of these tips and help come from our last webinar as well, simply because, like I said, community actions and changes go hand in hand. So a lot of those tips go hand in hand. And then lastly, we'll have some time for any questions, or if anyone has any examples of their own they would like to kind of throw out there and we can talk about. So let's go ahead and get right into what is a community change. And even if you are a seasoned REACH veteran, maybe you're new to the system, knowing what a community change is isn't always cut and dry, right? It's not always that fine line there. It sometimes can be a gray area. So when it comes to talking about community changes today, I want you to think of this definition first. This is kind of what is our hard edges around a community change. And that's going to be the implementation of a new or significantly modified policy, program, procedure, practice, partnership in the community designed to reduce substance use, abuse, misuse, whatever your kind of goals, focus areas might be. Let's kind of dissect this a little bit for a moment. So when we're looking at the definition of what a community change is, but we're first going to notice our bold words, right? And those are bolded for a reason, mainly because we don't want to be recording things as a community change if they've already happened. So a lot of times as coalitions, we tend to implement programs and then we see those programs repeated, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis. While that's good, right? We're glad we have these programs that have longevity and are sticking around in our communities and having an impact. The only time they have that large overall impact of a community change is when they are new. So let's keep that in mind. So a lot of times when it comes to recording these, we're looking for that word new. The other bolded word here is significantly modified. And as you guys have probably known, working with whoever scores your data, or if you're someone newer to REACH, you'll soon figure out there's going to be times that your coalition does things that are what we like to call modified. Maybe you've been doing this program for 2 years now. You've found very high success with this after-school program. Maybe it was targeting underage drinking prevention and education with the youth. We have found that it is working great, and we have recently added maybe it's tobacco and vaping to our logic model, and we would like to now expand that program into tobacco and vaping instead of just underage drinking or alcohol. That is one area we tend to see constitute a significant modification in order for it to be included as what we call a new or a modified community change. So that's one of your big indications of something being modified, is kind of that change in focus area or substance, depending on what you're working on. Sometimes it can also be a kind of change in location. A lot of you, as our clients, serve county-wide. So you guys might have multiple different cities, communities, townships, and areas like that, that can constitute modification. So if we, used to maybe hold our annual spring picnic that we have, and we do education and different things at this event, maybe we usually hold it in the Riverside community within our county. And a lot of people were saying, hey, it's not as easy for us to get there. Is there any way we can have this picnic on the, south side of the county, maybe in South New Haven or whatever, wherever it might be? In that sense, that kind of modification can constitute a community change as well. So it can sometimes be location specific, whether it's substance or, your problem goal specific change. Significant modification is very particular to the client and to you guys as a coalition and a community. So we don't like to say, in one community, it could be a modified change, and the other community, it could not. So keep in mind, there is that little bit of gray area when it comes to tracking your community changes. The biggest thing you can do to help us and you guys track your data accurately and make sure that it's getting tracked as a change if it needs to be, is to include that information in the description. If you think it is a community change and you think it's modified enough or it's brand new, let us know that in the description. Say, hey, this is new. We've never done this before. Community's never done this. This is new. Or, hey, we used to do it this way and we just swapped it all around, changed it up, and now we're doing it this way. Sometimes that can lead to longer than your average descriptions, and that's okay. Are really, what we like to say is be specific, because I have seen some coalitions be really specific about their community changes in one sentence, and I'm like, yep, that's a community change. Others might take, one sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, whatever you feel you need to show your reviewer, your scorer, that, hey, this is a community change. Add it in, because I always say, the more the better, because it helps us kind of get a better glimpse of what you're reporting and what's happening in your community. But we also don't want to put too much in it to where it kind of waters down our message and waters down what we're trying to get across, which is that, hey, we implemented this community change. So just kind of keep that in mind. And the last thing we have on this page with what is a community change was kind of making sure the coalition or the organization had an active part in the implementation. And basically what that means is, if the local school district decides to update a policy, but asked for no input from the coalition was not involved, the coalition can't quite take that community change as their own, because they were not actively part of implementing it, right? They just kind of got to sit back, watch it happen, which is great. It's something they probably wanted to see. But if you didn't have an active part of at least, getting in there, having the conversations, giving the information, advocating, so to speak, the coalition can't quite say, hey, this was our new policy we helped make happen, or hey, we helped implement this new procedure. So just keep that in mind as well, knowing that line of, did the coalition help implement this policy, program, procedure, practice type thing. All right, so we've kind of been talking about it a little bit as we were talking about what is a community change, but let's get into the nitty gritty, which we all, have troubles with, which is descriptions, right? What does our description need to have for a community change? Again, you're going to notice a lot of similarities between this and our community actions if you were on that webinar last month. And that's because, like I said, they go hand in hand, right? We can't have community changes without community actions. At least that's usually what happens. So when it comes to recording the descriptions for our community changes, we need to keep in mind that we're being specific about what that community change is. So was it a new policy? Was it a new program? Was it a modified procedure? Was it a new partnership? Did we launch a new social media campaign about vaping? Being very specific in what that actual change we are reporting is, again, will help keep your description from getting kind of muddy and watered down, and it helps your reviewers see very clearly what you're trying to capture as a community change. You'll also see a couple additional things down here. So, what is new or modified? Was it a policy? Was it a practice? Sometimes those key words like this can be really helpful as well when writing your descriptions. And again, that's simply because it helps helps you from getting a watered down description and some of that important words like policy, practice from getting lost. It's also important to know who is involved, especially if you're reporting something like a new partnership or a new collaboration with the business. Even if it's not a new partnership, and let's say we are working with a local agency to host or launch a new practice or a new program. Maybe we've already been partnered with them before and we're just working with them to launch a program or launch a practice. It's really important to include in our description who is involved. Was it the local YMCA? Was it the local Chamber of Commerce? And that just helps you guys in the long run as a coalition have that good data to look back on and say, hey, we partnered with them in the past on something like this. Maybe they'd be interested in partnering again in the future. Or, it's also really helpful to send out thank yous and just say, hey, we are so grateful you helped us with this new program and getting it launched. Keep us in mind for other things in the future. So it kind of helps breed that communication and collaboration in your community, which should be helpful in the long run. And then lastly, if it's a new kind of coalition member, a new sector rep that you guys are seeing, maybe it's a new committee, or I'm sorry, not a new committee, a new kind of partnership in this sense, just make sure you're saying who it is, being specific with names, like I said up here with the new partnerships too. It just helps you guys in the long run know how your coalition's growing, your capacity, and that kind of approach to kind of grow our work and make the community better, right? And then the other thing to keep in mind with description must-haves is that location piece. So being really clear first about, what is the change? Was it a policy, a practice, a program, those kind of keywords. And then the next thing we tend to look for as someone who reviews data is who is doing the implementing, or where is this being implemented? Is it in a community? Is it at a local business? Is it another organization? Is it the local school district? Especially if you have multiple school districts in your county. Again, those of you who are county-wide serving, you might have 2 different school districts, maybe more. So being really specific in who is implementing that change is going to help you guys in the long run as well, because it's going to help your reviewers see, oh, hey, they had 2 community changes, one for ABC school district and then one for XYZ school district. Because those can be separate, right? They're separate school districts. They don't happen at the same time. So we want to make sure that we're keeping them separate and we're labeling them as such. Let's go ahead and move into some of our description samples then. All right. So first up, this is one that is a little bit shorter, right? Nothing longer than one little simple sentence, if you could even call it a complete sentence. But basically, this coalition wrote that they partnered with Walgreens Pharmacy to install a new permanent drug disposal box. This is an okay description. If I'm being really nitpicky, there's a few things I would maybe suggest adding just for the coalition's purpose to help make it better. If this is a county-wide coalition and they have multiple Walgreens in their county, I would maybe say which Walgreens, Walgreens on the north side, Walgreens on the south side of town, Walgreens in Spring Meadow community, where is this Walgreens at, might be kind of helpful. We can see that they're partnering with this Walgreens to install the permanent box. So it's a nice kind of partnership, establishing that communication and that collaboration and that new partnership in a way. Or maybe it's not new, maybe they've partnered with other Walgreens or this Walgreens before. The new thing here that we're seeing is the permanent drug disposal box being installed. So again, I think that is very well put as well. We can see that it's new. They've never had one at this location before. And it points to the problem goal that we're working to address, which is prescription drugs and disposal, right? Making that more readily available. So again, not a bad description, a couple tweaks maybe to make, but this is overall a decent one, and it's not super long, right? It's not overly complicated. It's really short, simple, and to the point. Let's look at our next one. We have here, Northridge School District agreed to implement new curriculum focused on mental health and education, and educating/training youth on coping mechanisms. So this is great. This is another kind of shorter one, again, like one sentence, nothing super long. Here they were a little bit more specific about who was implementing this change. So in this case, we can see it was the Northridge School District. You know, maybe they have multiple school districts. In this case, they were able to label that for us, so we know. We can see that it has been agreed upon, so that means it is going to be implemented. And here we can see what it is that's going to be new. It is curriculum, so we know it's going to be some kind of curriculum implemented in the schools. In this case, it's kind of more on the educating and training focus for the youth. We can see what problem goal it is being targeted here, which is mental health. So if our coalition is working on mental health, education, implementation, things like that, we can see that. And again, this is a pretty good description for a community change. This would probably not get caught up. This would probably go right through and get accepted. So another good example here. All right, Jackie had a question come through. Yay, Jackie, you're not Virgil today. I know you've had issues with that in the past, but yay, okay. So since we are a community coalition, if we have vape take back event in different high schools, they are community changes. If it is the first time, yes, because they're new locations. So it kind of leans into the strategy of enhancing access and reducing barriers, right? Because if we used to only have, 2 locations and now we are launching at our next Take Back Day, maybe we have 2 new schools that are going to be hosting this. That would definitely be a community change because it's that location difference. Again, if you're kind of changing from one location to another, I still think you could count it as a community change because it's still modifying it, right, Jackie? It's still changing the location. I would hesitate to say that on the odd chance there might be something that you wouldn't count it as a community change for some reason, but in my mind, the way you're describing it, I would definitely count it as a community change. Awesome. I think I have one more description on this page for us to talk through. And in this case, they are working with South Ridge School District, who agreed to update their signage around the schools and athletic facilities to now be tobacco-free instead of smoke-free. They were doing this to implement tobacco-free initiative instead of it just saying, smoking. A lot of schools are going to this with the whole vaping tobacco and different things like that, or chewing tobacco. They wanted all of that out of their schools, especially during athletic events and stuff. So they wanted to make sure to update these around all facilities at the school. I am okay with this. I think they were really clear about the updating and what was going to be updated. And in this case, it was just the signage. There wasn't any policy that needed to be updated here, I guess. If there was, they could have added that as well. But here we know it's just going to be the signage and the topic, what problem goal we're working on. In this case, it's obviously tobacco. If it was something else, we could, of course, adjust that as we need to. So again, another pretty good example. Again, each coalition, each community is very different and does things their own way. So what might be a good description here might need to be tweaked for one of your examples or something that you might be reporting. Just like Jackie kind of had the question on, the vaping take back events and stuff and what they're going to be doing. She has that information, and as long as that's in the description, right, it should be good. So just keep in mind that there's going to be tweaks you're going to need to make depending on your coalition's work and the way you guys are reporting. All right, so this is the area where we're not going to spend too much time on, simply because we go into these a lot in the community actions webinar video. So if you're more interested in kind of learning about some of these tips when it comes to community changes and community actions, definitely check out that video. We're going to cover a couple things today in terms of kind of graphics tips I recommend using when it comes to tracking your coalition's actions and changes. And the first thing being, use a diagram or some type of layout that helps you organize your coalition's actions and changes. A lot of times our clients tend to get tripped up on reporting actions and changes. They might forget to report some, or they might overly report things that they think are community actions or changes that really aren't. And one way to get yourself organized and to know whether or not you're reporting things, the right way the first time is to use something like a diagram. So this was one diagram we came up with. This coalition had specific strategies they wanted to address, and those were listed at the top of these gray boxes. And then to address those strategies, they had some different community changes they wanted to see implemented in their community. And that's what's in these gray boxes right here as well. So here, the school board, they were trying to get the school board to modify the substance policy to include e-cigarettes, vaporizers, and nicotine products here. Over here, the coalition worked with the local park and city officials to install a light in the park under this pavilion where they were seeing a lot of substance use with the youth. So those were a couple things that their coalition identified as being problems and things that they can then implement or changes they can make. And then to kind of backwalk that work, they went ahead and wrote down some of the actions that they might need to take in these blue boxes. So in terms of what we're looking at in a diagram, we're seeing, hey, this is clear cut a community action, right? This is a step we need to take to get me to my gray box or my community change that we'd like to see. Same thing here, both of these, you might have 2 boxes in a column, you might have 10 boxes in a column. It really depends on that change that you're working towards and what you as the coalition feel you need to do. Again, I love diagrams because I think it's an easy way to break down the coalition's work for the coalition members. Far too often as the staff, we just get in the headspace of this needs done, let's do it. And sometimes we don't always involve the coalition members as much as we probably could or should. And we're all guilty of it, it's fine. But I would really like to encourage you to use some sort of diagram like this one or the next one I'm going to show you, because it helps bring in those different voices. It helps them get ownership of the work. If you're asking them, hey, we're seeing this problem, what do you guys as a group feel we need to do to address this? Or how do we get to this change we want to see, right? So this is one of our diagrams. The other one I want to share with you, which I actually like a bit more because I think it represents coalition work and kind of the craziness it can be at times. This is kind of like that spider story web diagram you might have seen from elementary school. And this is really helpful in my mind because at any given time, we might have a community action we need to take, and then there might be another community action that stems off of that, right? So if we meet with the local administrators and the principals to discuss how these modifications would impact the school and the disciplinary actions around this new policy we're trying to get implemented or this modified policy, after this meeting, we might have another spider leg or line off of this that we have to go back and do some research. Maybe we're going to do some follow-up meetings with a couple of the administrators and the principal. So it's helpful in terms of growing, because here we can add additional community actions as they pop up or as we may need. So again, a great way to take this to your coalition members a coalition meeting even and saying, hey, this is one of the things in our action plan we said we do. We said we work on modifying a policy with the school in terms of vaping and e-cigarettes. How do we get this policy done, right? How do we get this to fruition and really get it to that community change part? And it's really helpful, I think, to have these, again, to look back on, simply because sometimes as communities, we might not be ready for this change. We might do a couple of the things and we just realize, hey, the community's not ready for this yet. School board's pushing back on it. Maybe we hold it off until a year later. And that's okay. You know, a lot of times when we're working with communities, it's just kind of par for the course. But at least we have this to look back on and say, hey, this is what we planned in the past. Does this still make sense? Does this still work? If not, what modifications or changes do we need to make in our approach and in our actions to get this policy passed, right? To get this change implemented. So just kind of two different things to look through. And you also heard me mention an action plan as well. Action plans can be really helpful if you're someone who's like, I don't want to have to create a completely separate diagram. I just want to use what I already have. Action plans can be very helpful as well, because our action plans usually detail out what community changes we want to see. So for instance, we might see things here as, you know, create and distribute local alcohol beverage law booklets to retailers. If we've never done this in our community and we need to create and, you know, launch this, distribute these for the first time, hey, we know that's a community change, right? We've never done this. This is something new. So we can put this in kind of our mind as the change and then crosswalk some of those different things we're maybe doing to get that implemented and to get those booklets distributed. Same thing, some of these, you know, send retailers proper ID procedures. Some of these might be community changes, but keep in mind, some might be things we're already doing that we want to continue doing, maybe expand on. So just keep in mind that your community action can be a good place to start, but it's not going to be your always one all be all for, hey, this is a community change, we have it in our action plan. That's not kind of the message I want to give you, but it's at least a good place to start, because your action plan really guides your work you guys are trying to do. And it'll help you link back to your problems. You know, under here we have decreased youth retail access to alcohol. So we know any of these activities down here, or these community changes, if they, you know, so be it, we know that we can link it right to our problem goal or right to our logic model of alcohol, because that's what our action plan says, right? That's what we're trying to do here. So another tip to kind of look at your community actions and your changes. Again, this is usually something a lot of coalitions already have, so it's a great starting point. I then a lot of times suggest coalitions to branch off of this with one of those diagrams and say, hey, take one of these activities, put it in the center of that circle and say, you know, we want to see this happen in our community. How do we get here, right? All right, well, I'm not seeing anything else come through. So I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Hope everyone learned a little bit of something today. You know, it's always good to take it back to the basics and just kind of talk about some of our reach outputs and different things. If you do have any questions after this webinar, please feel free to email us. With that, everyone enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you on our next webinar.